So let's talk about Rousseau's concept. First of all, before I give you the details, you will see that the democratic social contract is much more complex. And, I think that's one of the reasons why so many out there have an admiration for strongman rule. I think it's because, the dictatorial social contract is so much simpler and it's so much easier to make sense out of it. And, I actually believe that I'm making my bit here for democracy by explaining the democratic social contract, because once you have understood it, then political life in a democracy will start to make way more sense. And hopefully you will support the democratic social contract over the dictatorial one. Okay, so I'm closing this side note. Let me explain you Rousseau's concept. So what are the conditions of this social contract? Well, first of all, you have to give up all your nature rights, all your jungle rights. You have to give them all up. So, I said earlier, in nature, you were free to kill and rape. Well, this has to stop. You were free to grab land. Well, this also has to stop. You will have to stop grabbing land from the others. But not only will you have to stop grabbing land from the others, you also have to give in the land you had previously grabbed while you were still in the state of nature. So now that this land that you had previously grabbed, this now is put in common. This is now the sovereignty of the social body of which you are now becoming part. So yeah, you give up the right to kill, rape, you give up your nature possessions, but also you give up the right of disposing of your own life. Earlier, back in the state of nature, you were free to be a coward. You were free to run away. No longer. Now you are becoming part of the social body. If the social body decides to punch, you may be part of the fist. You're going to be hit by this punch, and you're going to give the impact, but you're going to be impacted yourself by this punch. What I mean here is that you may have to risk your own life to protect members of the social body, as well as land that is the sovereignty of the social body, if this is what the sovereign decides to do. So this is a huge commitment. Like, you are giving up all your nature rights. Why would you want to do that at the first place? Well, you gain in exchange the protection from the sovereign. And as a side note, so you are becoming part of the social body, but in Rousseau, the sovereign and the social body is the same thing. Please note that here there is no one on top. There is no head. And there's no single person on top of this sovereign. Why? Because the sovereign is the social body. Everybody within the social body takes part in the sovereignty of the social body. So you gain protection from the sovereign, meaning that everybody else protects you, and you are an essential part of the protection of everybody else. But you also gain civil rights. So again, in order to become part of the sovereign of the social body, you had to give up all your nature rights. But in exchange, now that you are part of the social body, you gain civil rights. And with Rousseau, all those civil rights are conventional rights. They are unspecified and they are conventional. Why are they conventional? Because basically they are aligned with the will of the general interest. So one day, the will of the general interest may say that one thing is allowed, and the next day, it's no longer allowed. So this is all conventional and unspecified. So how do we determine the will of the general interest? This is a very important question, right? Well, this is also specified in the social contract. And so in the social contract, you also have details explaining the form of governance allowing to determine the will of the general interest. So let's sum up. First of all, what are the characteristics of the sovereign? Again, with Rousseau, the sovereign and the social body is the same thing. So what are the characteristics? Well, the sovereign is composed of all the individuals, all the contracting members. What is the will of the sovereign? It's the will of the general interest. And how do you determine that will? Well, again, this is determined thanks to the form of governance specified in the social contract. And what are the powers of the sovereign? Well, the sovereign is almighty. Again, all the members who take part in the social body, they all gave in all their nature rights, with no exceptions. They gave up all their nature rights. And now they gain civil rights, but all those civil rights are conventional and depend on the will of the general interest. In other words, those conventional rights depend on the will of the sovereign. That's it. Basically, there are no fundamental freedoms. And you may say, "Wow, that sounds dangerous." And you are right. This is dangerous. So before we talk about that, let me tell you why Rousseau thinks this is not dangerous. Well, he thinks this is not dangerous because he believes that laws will apply to everyone roughly with the same proportions. And I'm not going to vote laws that are unfair to myself, and therefore I'm not going to vote laws that are unfair to the others, because I'm impacted by the same way by the laws. But obviously we have experience of democracy, and we know that this is not true. We know that depending on your age group, on your demographics, and whether you're part of a minority, you may be affected more or less by your laws than the others. So basically here, really, it's an open door to the tyranny of the majority. So we'll talk about this flow, and especially how modern democracies correct that flow. But for now, let me go on explaining Rousseau's concept. So let me just sum up also the difference between nature law and now civil law, also known as positive law. And this is, so nature law is while you are still in the state of nature, while civil law is what you gain once you have signed up to the social contract. So in nature, your freedom is only limited by your own strength, while with Rousseau, civil freedom is always conventional and is only limited by the will of the general interest. In nature, you had possessions, which were merely the effect of force or the right of the first occupier, things that you had grabbed. While in civil law, you get private property. And again, this private property is limited by the will of the general interest. We may accept the fact that this patch of land is your private property, but the will of the general interest may require you to pay taxes on this private property, or even worse, if the will of the general interest says that a road needs to be built on your land, then a road is going to be built on your land. I'm sorry. Okay, let me finish on a very famous quote from this book that is almost always misunderstood. Whoever refuses to obey the general will shall be constrained to do so by the entire body, which means nothing other than that he shall be forced to be free. And I think that many of you, when I read that someone shall be forced to be free, I think that many of you jumped from their chair. I said, "Whoa, this is not possible. No one can be forced to be free." Well, it's because you don't understand the quote. And this is totally normal. You actually need the whole paragraph to understand that quote. So before I actually share with you the whole paragraph, let me tell you what this quote is about. This quote is against free riding. The social contract is not an empty form where you check boxes like whatever, who cares, I'll free ride. No. The social contract is a huge commitment. It binds you, it commits you. As I said earlier, you are giving in all your nature rights. So this is a big deal. And let me share with you now the whole paragraph. So I'm not going to read it aloud because it's a bit complex. I have annotated it and change the structure for you to better understand it. So I will let you pause and read it carefully on your own. So if I may sum up the previous paragraph, I would simply say that civil freedom is not free. Because as you joined the social body, sure, you gave in all your nature freedom, but in exchange you gained civil freedom. But those civil freedoms are not free. They come at a cost. And most of the times, this cost, you will have to pay it with a very mild price. It will simply be, for instance, taxes that you have to pay in order to fund a functioning social body. This mild cost will also simply be the fact of having to abide to laws with which you personally disagree with. But unfortunately, there are times where you will have to pay a very expensive personal cost. For instance, if some members of the social body are being attacked, or if some land that is under the sovereignty of the social body is being attacked, the sovereign, i.e. the will of the general interest, may send you to fight in order to protect those individuals or that land. And you may die from it. So below is a memorial in Washington, D.C. for those who died honoring their commitment. So congratulations, now you know pretty much everything about Rousseau's concept. There's still one major thing I haven't talked about. I haven't told you, for instance, that Rousseau doesn't believe in representative democracy. In the next video, you will understand modern democracies in the light of Rousseau's concept. So really, the next video is going to be the most interesting, and I hope to see you there.